at the end, we can say amen, but those last two lines, I don't know if any of you have any of that in front of you that was in the program. Yeah, some of you have. But at the end, it says, and I have such a friend, his name is John. And I want everybody then, when we get to that point, to say that to me, loud and proud. Okay?
Okay.
That's all I'm going to
It
change
works.
on.
Okay.
Okay. I want a friend who celebrates life and who brings out the best of life in me. I need a friend who is a great storyteller, someone who possesses a great sense of humor, who loves to celebrate with good food and great wine, a friend who will pray and play and laugh with me, a friend who enjoys sharing good times together in silly skits and on vacations and unplanned adventures, someone who can share sorrowful times as well, who's on a common faith journey with me. I need a friend who can challenge my thinking, where differences do not diminish our friendship. I need a friend who is a Beatitudes practitioner, who sees glimpses of God in the routine of daily life. A friend who practices a faith connected to crucifixion and celebrates the joy of a faith based on resurrection. I want a friend to travel the road to Emmaus with me, walking together toward the mystery we call God. And
I have such a friend. His
name is John.
Thank you. Thank you. Isn't that a beautiful prayer?
Oh. Amen.
Visitation and mass this morning, and we came in through the side door and we went down the basement, and there were some young children down there, beautiful young children, playing on the elevator. And they saw us and they immediately got off the elevator because they probably weren't supposed to be playing in the elevator. And they had a table set up and they had all these bags of snacks lined up, and they were selling them for $1 a piece. So Tom said, oh, I said, what's the money go for? No answer. So Tom said, well, here, I'm going to give the money to the young lady. She'll probably take the best care of it. So I gave the young lady $1. And then he gave another young man $1. And he said, I don't, and another little boy said, oh, you don't have any more ones, looking at Tom's wad. The next one was a $5 bill. He said, oh, you don't have any more ones? And Tom said, no, I don't. So we came upstairs. Guess who those kids were? So John Pusey, you have some amazing grandchildren.
Brother and brother-in-law and sister are out of the room. I was just going to share with you, I'm Dave Muchow, friend, neighbor, and it occurred to me as I was driving to the cemetery after the funeral service, I was thinking, there's been something in the back of my head that's been going on for a lot of years, and it all came clear. I think John was the older brother I never had. John was 3 years older than I, and there could not be two people more different. I'm by education a mechanical engineer, and I went to school to learn how to say things in as few words as possible. And John was quite the opposite. But thank God God makes us all different. You know, we complement each other and look out for each other and help each other through this thing called life. And John was one of those people for me. I've told several people in the last couple of days that one of the greatest privileges that I've ever had was spending a good part of a week ago yesterday with John as he was dying. And for me, that I'm not built that way. My wife is built that way, and again, thank God we're all different. But I was given one last chance to, you know, to do what I was supposed to do, and you know, help John a little bit more on his journey. And it was a very mundane stuff. I won't go into all the details, but it was such a great opportunity to spend those last few moments with him. And you knew, you know, after being with him for a few hours that the time was very short. In fact, I remember telling Patty as I was leaving, I didn't think he was going to make it to Owens, where she was planning on having him go. Just a couple of funny stories that happened over the years. John, we used to joke that John and his next door neighbor at the time, Jack Driscoll, who was as handy as John was, the two of them were going to open a hardware store together. We had a wonderful street that John and Patty moved into their house. I think it was in 1975, maybe. And as soon as they moved in, they called and told us that that Christmas that the house across the street was for sale. We looked at it and bought it, and we've been there for 47, 48 years. However many years we've been there, they've been there 1 year more. But just it was so great to be part of that community and watch all of our kids grow up together. And fortunately enough, we had kids that were the same ages and obviously grew very close. But some of the crazy things that John did. One beautiful fall day, we were all out in the yard raking leaves and drinking beer. And here comes John with some new Levi's on. And they weren't Levi's, they were maybe Wranglers or something. But they were like right out of the box. And, you know, he couldn't even bend, they were so stiff he couldn't even bend his legs. And this was back in the days both drinking and smoking. And his new Levi's, I'm surprised he could roll up the legs, but he had the legs rolled up, you know, so he had a cuff. And smoking a cigarette, and I think Jack Kinney and I don't know, some of the other neighbors and I were out there talking, and I kept smelling something burning. And I looked down and John's pants leg was on fire. He had dropped his cigarette and it went into that cuff. And something a little more intimate and more on the serious side. Probably 37 years ago. No, 47 years ago. Holy smokes! We had only been in the house for maybe a year or two, and along came our first son, Matthew, and we were over at John and Pat's house when Rosemary's water broke, and John very graciously offered to come across the street and take care of the kids, and when when I came home with the good news that we had a newborn son, we began the celebration. And I don't know, I don't drink anymore, but I made up for it that night, as did John. And we sat and watched the sun come up, I think, as we drank our last scotch. But that was John. He was always there and always. They say the definition of a good friend is someone who will tell you other than the things you want to hear. And John was like that. John was. I gained a lot of perspective from John. Gonna miss him. I wish I could remember some of the stories right now. They'll come as soon as I put the mic down. But we miss you, John.
But most of all, I want to do a favor for John, and that is thanking Patty for loving him in such an extraordinary way. From way, way, way long time ago. 54 years, Patricia? We all celebrated John and Pat's, not we all. Some of us celebrated John and Pat's 54th anniversary this year. And toasted and laughed and cried, and it was great to celebrate that anniversary and many, many, many more birthdays and children arriving and having grandchildren and graduations and weddings and just moments of quiet and time on their deck and shoveling their snow and just so much of life we were given together. And for Pat, or for Dave and I and all our children and our grandchildren to come to know John and Pat and their children and their grandchildren, but to watch Pat forever, and especially the last 2.5 years. She was there in such an unbelievable, loyal, passionate, in Pat's way of passion, quiet and there, so strong. And I know we are all so thankful because we love John so much and love Pat. To thank you, Pat, for the gift you gave John.
I had introduced myself as Colleen Mattarelli, but now I'd like to change that to Dumb and Dumber when you don't know the mic is on. John, everybody knows how funny he was and how much fun. But I would like to share a story when I cannot, and Jim and I cannot remember when we first met Pat and John. I'm pretty sure it was through pre-Cana, but I'm not sure. But our oldest son is 51 years old and adopted. And John did that adoption for us. Well, in the process, I had made up my mind, and I can't sew for diddly, not really. So I took a class, but Pat sews beautifully, as did her mother. Pat, I don't know how it came to be, because I don't think you were taking the class, but I had made up my mind I was going to make a suit for my 1-year-old son for his adoption. Remember Dumb and Dumber. So Pat began to help me because she knew this is never going to make it in time for court on the adoption day. And we made a suit jacket with lapels. We made little short pants with a fly. I still have it. You don't think I'm going to let go of that, do you? At the time in court, I had to go on the stand. John was just putting sweet things into the record. Is this your son? You give him this name, all this stuff. And then he said, and it is in the official record, "Is it true, Mrs. Mattarelli, that you made the suit your son is wearing?" That's who he was. You know, he was so full of fun, but oh man, was he a tender heart. And I never forgot it. And then a number of years later, he did another adoption for us. And then there were times that I will not talk about that we went to him for other reasons, shall we say, that had to do with the children, but we're not going there. He was always there. And I can remember being so sad when he retired. I mean, I didn't have anything necessarily pending, but the fact that I couldn't turn to him. Anyway, this was one terrific man. And I just also want to say, we all know this, but we are so blessed. This was probably the finest funeral I have ever attended, Pat. And what it is, indeed, it is a total celebration of what we all know, and that is friendship based in faith. And man, are we lucky. So, thank you. I know it took a lot of effort, and I personally am very grateful, and we all are. God bless you.
As Johnny would want, I'll be brief. My name is Tom O'Connor. My wife of 58 years, Adrienne, is here with me. We are from the center of the universe, where Johnny grew up, Bellefontaine, Ohio. It's not Bellefontaine, it's Bellefontaine, Ohio. I can't remember a time when I didn't know Johnny Pusey. I'm doing what?
You're close to the microphone. That's that noise. You're close to the microphone.
I'll try not to do that. Anyway, I want the grandchildren to know, if you are listening, just how talented Johnny was. You know, you can put everything in the obituary, and you will read it sometime, but you can't get everything in there. When Johnny was a teenager, he worked at our family business, O'Connor's Landing, little resort on a little Indian lake in central Ohio where we now live. And Johnny was a clerk. We were a general store, a bait shop. We rented boats and motors. And Johnny did all the things you had to do, including when people ask you what the fish are biting on, are the fish biting, you would say they're biting like crazy, on what bait, on whatever was in the refrigerator. What was the answer? But Johnny did it all. Johnny counted night crawlers, counted minnows, stocked the grocery shelves, rented hotel rooms, rented cottages, did it all. For many years, I got a letter, a birthday card on my birthday, signed by Mrs. Edwards. Well, she rented a cottage at our place every year, and she had about 5 kids. Her husband was either deceased or smart enough to stay away. I don't know which. And she would rent a boat and a motor. Now, when you did that, you had to get the motor out of our storage area, carry it out, put it on. Johnny did all that very well. But we both dreaded when Mrs. Edwards would come across the playground headed toward the store. We'd look out the screen door, and here she comes, because we knew what was happening was that once the kids had broken the outboard motor, the boat leaked, and she made a very distinct impression on Johnny, and hence I got the letter every birthday from Mrs. Edwards. Now, Johnny is in heaven, we all know that, for all the reasons that have been mentioned in this wonderful celebration of life today. But he's got one more challenge ahead of him. He'll be up there in heaven, and Mrs. Edwards will approach him. The hot water spigot is dripping. Johnny will treat it with humor and somehow take care of the problem. Johnny, we came to visit Johnny about 5 weeks ago. Johnny hadn't changed since we were in St. Patrick at parochial school together, Bell Mountain High School together, Notre Dame together. Same great guy, just a fabulous fellow. My wife Adrian and our good friends from Bell Mountain, who couldn't be here today, just love Johnny to death. Just couldn't have a better guy. Pat, thanks so much for this wonderful celebration. That's it.
Hello, I'm Mark Wirtz. I was one of the younger partners at the Vanaken firm, I'd like to thank anyway. And I didn't start my career there, but I joined there in 1995. And I'd seen John before. And one of the primary places I had seen him before I went on board was at the Peoria Bar Association Christmas party every year. Now, the Peoria Bar Association Christmas party is something that is like no other Christmas party I'd ever seen, and unfortunately, they're not like this anymore. But back in those days, we used to go to the cotillion room, I believe it was called, next to the main ballroom at the Pier Marquette. And there was probably 150, 200 lawyers in there. No spouses or friends, it was just the lawyers. And the people that were performers were also lawyers, whether it was the band or the comedy routines, skits. And one of the performers was John Pusey. And as things evolved over the years, he became the moderator for the part of the skit where there was a takeoff done of Jeopardy. And he would stand up at a podium like this in front of all these lawyers, which is, of course, a tough crowd. And he would announce the answers, and then there was 3 contestants who would, of course, give the questions. And John's part, was the moderator. He would stand up there. Well, over the years, first thing, let me go back. There's a curtain behind the 3 contestants. The 3 contestants are actually other lawyers who are playing the part of other judges or lawyers. This is dangerous stuff. And John was the moderator. And somewhere over the years, lawyers being lawyers, they decided that the rolls that were at the round tables like we have here, there would be a basket of rolls. Well, it seemed like they never would all get consumed. So during the skits, and there was more than just Jeopardy, but Jeopardy was a prime example of where this happened. The lawyers would pick up the rolls if something was going on, and they would throw them at the stage. And of course, there's curtains in the background, and it would catch the ones that missed hitting some people. John would stand up there and say things like, "Spencer for 50," and a roll would go zinging right by. He stood there, he never even ducked for those rolls. It was so funny, and the material was so funny, and yes, John, I'm sure, was one of the people that wrote for it. He told me when I joined the firm that some of the material for the skits and things was submitted anonymously, and if you heard it, you would know why. Because they got some goodies in on some of the lawyers and judges. But John would stand up there in his elegant way, and those rolls would just be flying by him, and he'd keep on going. So here it is, 2023. We haven't had skits like that for probably 15 years. They've changed the format, basically probably because there's nobody to do the performing. So I was on the phone with another lawyer who I have a case against Monday. And I told him, we had a hearing yesterday, and I told him, I said, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do the hearing. We might have to continue it because my former partner, John Pusey's funeral is going to be possibly Thursday. I'm not sure when it's going to be. And he said, oh, he said, he passed away? I said, yes. He says, I remember those skits. He was so funny. So here we are this many years later, And even the lawyers remember his wonderful wit that he had. And he would also deliver lines during those skits, Jeopardy, which weren't obviously in the material. He'd just come up with them. He was just wonderful for that. Anyway, he was a stabling force in our law firm, and he was always humorous. That came from the first lawyer I worked for when I was at Bradley, right there. So, anyway, here's to John. Thank you.
My name is Bill Rising, and my acquaintance with John is not as a neighbor, but as a client and friend, and obviously with Pat. My wife, Patty, and our good friend, Chris Adler, got to work with Pat at ICC. So we became more acquainted, and we asked John to draw up a will for us. So we went down to the office, and he draws up this will, not complicated, I'm sure, for him. And oh, that's great, John, thank you very much. And the girls come in and sign and witness. No charge. I thought, oh, we're going to have to take you out to eat, and maybe, a bottle of whatever. So we go out to eat to the Hofbrau. Good food, strong beer, and plenty of it. So we leave that evening after having a fine time with Pat and John, and get the report the next day that John had a heart attack. Felt a little responsible, but then I found out it wasn't the first time he'd had imbibed in beer. Maybe the second or third, I don't know. I will say this, Pat. You and John, a life well lived. A great gentleman.
When I was up here earlier, I said I was going to forget all the things I wanted to say, and I did. I walked back to the table, and Rosemary reminded me when a week ago Friday, we had a study club, and John and Pat came, and Don read his poem or his prayer that we heard tonight or today. And I was saying during the course, I have this weird mind that songs keep playing and songs that, an incident or an instance will remind me of a particular song. And that night, I kept the song "Show Me the Way to Go Home" kept playing in my head. And that was what I wanted to say earlier, that John, the last few months, was doing just that. He was showing us the way to go home. And what a beautiful way he did.
Oh, Joe. Thank you. At least one of the Pusey since I was in high school, because Pat was a couple years behind me at the academy when I was at Spalding. I was a class of '62. But later on, I met a young lady, and we were engaged. And at that time, the Catholic Diocese of Peoria used to encourage pre-Cana conferences. So probably about November of 1971, I was in pre-Cana with my fiance, and John and Pat were sort of the, I'd say, the lay moderators or lay operators of the bunch. And so I got reacquainted. We got acquainted with him, and of course, she'd been in high school with me. So then, several years later, I was sent a subpoena that my then wife was seeking a divorce from me. So I immediately thought of John Pusey as a possibility of legal representation. And I remember when I was meeting with him, I was thinking, this is kind of an interesting way to do it. You do pre-Cana, and then if it doesn't work out, it's more business for Vernock and Tragan. which is life is that way. And I remember he made the one comment at one of our conferences that he thought that Patty and I were kind of an unusual combination, but he said at the time, he says, but sometimes those unusual combinations work out real well. And of course, sometimes they don't. So at that time, I worked for the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Some of you people call it the Farm Lab over at Nebraska University. And we added a new lab in Athens, Georgia, the Richard B. Russell Research Center. And I was attracted to be sent down there and do some computer work for him down there along with my chemistry. So I get down there, and after we were down there for a while, I met a young lady, and we got married, and we had a little girl. And of course, everyone wants to see the pretty baby, and most of the guys, when they see our Cecilia, would look at us and say, "Boy, she's going to make somebody a pretty wife someday." And that was a mentality of my wife and I. That's not really what we had in mind for our kid. It's good, but that's what we were thinking of her. And so we moved to Chicago when she was 9 months old, and eventually about 36 years ago. And I was working for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services in the regional office in downtown Chicago. And there was a lady in the personnel department named Lori Manning. And I was the computer guy for the building for our operation, and she was the contact for computer stuff with the personnel. And we were visiting one day with some other people, and I happened to mention I was from Peoria. And of course, one guy volunteered right away that they go down to Peoria all the time because they like the riverboat in Peoria a lot better than that one in Gary, Indiana. Which I figured was a euphemism for something or other. But then Lori mentioned, "Oh, Dickie and I are going down to Peoria next weekend." And I said, "Oh, you're going to the riverboat too?" And she says, No. She says, my husband's law school roommate works law down there, practices law down there. And I just said, "Well, I know a few attorneys, so what's his name?" She kind of looked at me and says, Kathy Murray? Okay, right next to Kathy there. And she says, Pusey. And I said, "John and Pat Pusey? I don't think I know them." And she had the funniest look on her face. "Well, how do you know their names?" "Well, I went to high school with Pat." So it was obviously a true case of the world's a smaller place than we really think it is some days. That even in Chicago, I could be working in an office with some people I knew here in Peoria. And I thought that was kind of a neat deal too then. And of course, I understand Mr. Manning passed away recently, and we kind of lost contact with the Mannings because we moved back to Peoria 23 years ago when I retired. So we'll see if I can reconnect with Lori and see how things are going for her. That's my little story.
Our family moved away from Peoria over 45 years ago, but have stayed in touch with many of our dear friends here all that time and come back regularly. But a couple things, if I remember correctly. A bunch of us were learning how to play tennis. We were probably all in our 20s and had little toddlers that we'd take to the tennis courts with us. I knew nothing about rackets or anything like that. And at some point I heard John was going to get his tennis racket restrung. And I said to my husband, I said, "Is John good enough to play tennis and to get his tennis racket restrung? Is it worth the effort and expense?" Because none of us were any good at the time. So if John was here, he would bring that up, even though it probably happened 50 some years ago, because we know he didn't forget anything. And he was always telling stories about us. And then one other silly thing, we're together with a group and talking about baseball, and I don't know players, or anything. And I said, "Isn't it cool the Air brothers are on the same team?" And John says, "Dee, what do you mean?" And I said, Hui and Javi Air, the Air brothers. Well, it was one player named Julian Javier. I don't know if any of you remember him. He would bring that up if he was here today as well. But my kids, of course, knew I was coming here and send their sympathy and prayers for all of your family, John, or Pat, and your kids and grandkids. And Kevin, my youngest, who is 46, so he wasn't even born in Peoria. We had already moved to Naperville. But he knew John from visits back to Peoria, often to the Muchos because of being across the street, and then our times in Macatawa together. And he texted, "Mom, send my sympathies to John Pusey's family. I always really liked John. He was smart, fun, and kind." And if you could think of 3 words to encapsulate John, I think that covers it quite well. Thanks.
I'm Ken Zika, my wife Judy. We know John and Pat mainly through a study group. We're the new kids in the group. We joined in '91. Most of the people have been in it for 10 or 15 years prior to us. But we love John, Pat, and we love the group. There's like 14 of us, I think. I have one really quick short story. And we were at the Puseys, actually, their turn to host it, and we were sitting around and we was just sort of chattering before the actual evening began, and people started talking about who they were named for. And John, Dave was there evidently. John says, and we're all listening, John says, well, I was named for my Uncle Roger. And we like, what did he say? Like, first nobody was paying attention. Like, what did you say? He said, well, I was named after my Uncle Roger. And we're all starting to roll in laughter. And he doesn't understand what we're laughing about. But he was named after his Uncle Roger, evidently. So that's my story.
I'm Jim Mattarelli, and as Colleen mentioned, we've known the Puseys for a long, long time. And the first time that we went to Makatawa, I don't know if that was the first time they had gone, but it was the first time we went, and we shared a house with the Puseys. And I can remember that, at some point, I think I was playing tennis with Jack Brady and maybe Ted Walgamont and whoever.
Is this the Sandals?
Hmm?
Is this the Sandals?
No, this is, somebody, if you've got another, Anyway, I'm sure whatever we were doing, and I can't remember if John was playing tennis with us or not, but we stayed way, way too long. And when I finally got back to the house, and Colleen is very upset with me, and said, you and that yo-yo priest. And of course, John was close. If he wasn't there, he was close enough to hear it. And so for perpetuity, he called Ted the yo-yo priest. So that's John's legacy. He always had a neat comment for anything.
And these aren't irreverent and they're not that funny, but here's the premise. If I can read my writing here. I call it John Pusey Paraphernalia. And I shared this with him at a little group just about 3 weeks ago. Here's the deal. Here's the setup. Imagine that John was an ancient Egyptian king with his own pyramid. And our task was to select the items that would join him in the pyramid. Items to consider. 1, the latest editions of the Peoria Journal-Star, the Chicago Tribune, and the USA Today, with the sports pages turned to the latest Cub and or Notre Dame scores. Number 2, a vast array of fiction books and professional journals, as well as a secret, never-before-revealed list of the complete history of study club subjects over the past 40 years, compiled by Jan Smith. A collection of sports jerseys featuring the Bears, the Cubs, the Illini, the Bradley Braves, and the Peoria Chiefs, along with a massive collection of Notre Dame gear. Now, this is all going in the pyramid. Okay? The remains of a car door, reportedly removed from his car during an incident where the object that removed the door from his car, a wall of railroad ties, would not move. The stub of a one-way ticket from West Point to Notre Dame, a collection of sandals and flip-flops John wore while playing tennis, a set of general tools including hammers, screwdrivers, pliers, saws, vice grips, and work gloves, and other miscellaneous devices never used, a map of Washington Island, Wisconsin, a once-in-a-lifetime destination, some manuals for adjusting a TV set, setting up a computer, servicing a lawnmower, printed instructions on how to use a snow blower, along with a collection of miscellaneous shovels, spades, axes, more work gloves, shears, all like new. Some old scripts of comedy skits and notes from various law firm and birthday celebrations, including an unfinished poem for Sister Rachel, suspended when John couldn't find a word to rhyme with Berkschneider. Some old scripts of comedy skits and notes from several elaborate hats and headpieces associated with Karnak the Magnificent skits. Younger people have to Google Karnak the Magnificent. And finally, 2 cases of wine. First, a Chardonnay that John would describe as perfectly golden on the pour. The nose is a beautiful blend of citrus, butter, cream, and white florals with hints of warm spice, butterscotch, vanilla, and citrus blossoms. And secondly, a Cabernet, an explosion of ripe blackberries and plums, sweet cedar, chocolate notes, and dried herbs, balanced by juicy acidity and loads of decadent chocolate notes for a long, satisfying finish. Have you ever heard John describe a wine? Anyway, those are some of the things to put in his.